Good.
Just one quick thing. The image of putting all those huge books in front of Isaac's son was
Yeah.
great in our experience. I mean,
Right.
we work a bit with America Speaks, and it's amazing to me how citizens from every walk of life can tackle really tough issues.
Yeah.
And understand the basic information that they need to make informed decisions
Right.
and really deliberate. So I love that.
Especially when you give them lollipops. That's true. That was the only way to avoid a mutiny with it. Okay, so I think part of what's exciting about the community learning centers is that I think what you can achieve there is to kind of recenter democracy in those neighborhoods, in those schools, in those community as a whole around the needs and goals of citizens. So that, yes, the needs and goals of kind of the involvers and various kinds of local leaders are being met, but really the people who matter most are kind of at the center of things. And so when you say recentering democracy, I think what you're talking about there is kind of the combination of governance and community. It's partly about the politics, about the decisions. It's also partly about the culture, about socializing, about fun. And so if you kind of add some more adjectives to that, you might come up with something more like this. You add your own adjectives, but that you're talking about governance that is equitable and deliberative and just, and where people have the information they need and people are transparent and sincere about things, all those kinds of things. And that on the community side, that it's inclusive, that it's engaging all these different kinds of people, and it's intensive and kind of bringing all the different talents and ideas to the table. And I kind of get silly beyond this and kind of add more things beginning with these. But basically, what you're talking about is discovering, deliberating, deciding, plus the dining, drinking, and dancing. And I think, so I was thinking about the CLCs and thinking about how could you achieve some of this kind of stuff. Here, I came up with some suggestions. And since I have a huge ego, I labeled them 7 magnificent suggestions. So first one is kind of convene the people who do have some experience in engaging, recruiting, facilitating, all those kinds of skills. And you probably have them in all these different walks of life. Either they're within the school system or local government, or they're within nonprofit organizations, or they're community organizers, or whatever, or they're young people. It doesn't matter. But bringing together a set of those people who have some of that kind of experience in some kind of a citywide committee to kind of promote, guide, advise, public engagement on all different kinds of issues. That can kind of be a conscience for the community's engagement efforts, and also kind of an advisor and a source of all kinds of knowledge. And one example of that's a really great one is from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. This is something called Portsmouth Listens, and it's a process, all volunteer-led committee which has engaged citizens, hundreds of people in this town around a bunch of different kind of big policy issues. First one had to do with school bullying, but they've gone now and used the same kind of process to get a bunch of people involved in developing a new master plan, land use plan for the community, balancing the city budget, dealing with school redistricting issues. Most recent one was whether to build a new middle school or renovate an older building in the middle of downtown. So it's basically become this kind of volunteer-driven, kind of organic kind of hub, not organic, but a volunteer-driven hub for engagement efforts throughout the city. The second thing I think is that in each of these CLCs, I think part of the potential here is if you actually convene a set of people who have a stake in that school and that neighborhood to be kind of committees, and committees is the worst possible word. Come up with something catchy, neighborhood roundtables or front porch, something that's be more compelling. But basically, to be a group that can be in part a governance group for that CLC and an engagement kind of leader for people in that neighborhood and the school. And to give those groups some kind of an official role in policy making and a central role in community building. So that they're responsible partly for making sure that the CLC community has a voice in decisions, policies that affect it, and also they're also responsible for sustaining the kind of sense of community and energy and social kind of vibrance that's going to kind of sustain that. And I think that those groups ought to be working on whatever, basically school issues, neighborhood issues, whatever it is they think are important, or that they think people in the community really care about. And that these ought to be things that are not simply kind of entities of Akron Public Schools or any other kind of institution in the community, but they really need to be jointly kind of owned and supported. And so different nonprofits in the faith community and business community and different kinds of sectors need to kind of be acknowledging them and working in various ways to support them. San Jose, California has something that's maybe somewhat like that. There's something called the Strong Neighborhoods Initiative, which you can read a lot more about, but it's intended to be this kind of multi-issue hub in each neighborhood, which is a really strong connection to San Jose local government. People need process skills to do this kind of stuff well. And it's not, these things aren't rocket science, but they need some kind of level of familiarity with how do you do some of these kinds of things. So in your initial work there, step number one, you will have found some people who have those kinds of skills already. The second thing is figuring out how you can train other people who need some of those kinds of skills. And one thing that works really well, and it's only been done in a couple places that I know about, but it worked very well at both places, was to actually train neighborhood leaders, school leaders, and public employees together at the same time. So Rochester, New York has done this. Basically, they have this kind of civic training academy where neighborhood leaders and people who work in the police department or people who work in the school system, they go through the training together. So they're learning some of these same skills together, and they're kind of building relationships and connections with one another. So they've got more of a kind of opportunity to create more collaboration once they're done. This is just a article about this thing in Rochester. The online piece has a lot of potential to it, and I've kind of talked a little bit about this already, but another kind of element of the CLCs might be to have some kind of online forum which allows people to kind of be part of the conversation about what's happening at the learning centers, how things are going, what kinds of decisions are coming up, all those kinds of things. And it's not a replacement for the face-to-face stuff, but it certainly could enrich it and kind of bring more people into the conversation. One thing you need to be aware of is that it's got to be simple or versatile enough that people can actually access this kind of thing through their cell phones, because that's one way part of what's we're seeing now with the digital divide and kind of the way people are accessing the internet is that lots and lots of people are using the handheld stuff, not just desktop computers. So you've got, and so particularly young people and lower income people and all those kinds of things. So you can overcome some of those kinds of challenges by making sure that whatever you're using is usable with those kinds of devices. In Brazil now, there are a number of cities which do enormous public engagement efforts, mainly around budgeting issues, where people can vote on local budgets using their cell phones. So Brazil is a country with very little, overall, a much lower level of internet access than the United States, and people generally don't have desktop computers, and yet they're doing some pretty cool, innovative, high-tech stuff, just making sure that they do it through the handhelds. This is an example of one in the U.S. This is called the Front Porch Forum. It's in Burlington, Vermont, but it's a kind of a local kind of online forum. And so what happens on these things is basically people are not only talking about various kinds of political or public issues, they're also saying, who knows a good plumber, and who has a canoe I can borrow. So it's kind of the combination of kind of the social stuff and the kind of the political stuff that is partly what's important. Going faster and faster as we get closer to 8:30. You need to be kind of tracking and assessing this stuff, and it's hard because it's sometimes it seems very intangible, and yet some of this stuff is relatively easy to kind of start tracking. And it's amazing to me how many people have done all kinds of great engagement efforts in communities, gotten lots of people involved in things, and they haven't been building databases while they do it. They don't kind of capture people's names and email addresses and phone numbers and things like that. And they don't capture, they may capture kind of the numbers of people who came to various meetings, but they don't capture the demographics. Or they don't give little basic kind of, satisfaction surveys. Did you like this meeting? How could we improve it? Those kinds of things. So if you add in more of those kinds of process elements that you're trying to measure, and you do that in a way that's publicly available so that people can see, you can go online somewhere and figure out who came to the most recent meeting, what kinds of people were there, those kinds of things. If you kind of set that up in a way that's transparent and open, then people can help you improve the process the more you do it. And I think that's part of one of the potentials of the online stuff is it's allowing people to kind of use data in a kind of a way that's where it's approachable. They can deal with the data and they can assess data in ways that actually help to improve the way communities are doing some of these kinds of things. So it's not just kind of the tangible decisions or action efforts or things like that. Those are important to kind of keep track of as well. But it's also the process stuff that I think needs to be part of what you're tracking. One thing that's cool, and I'm not sure how this what the possibilities are. But in lots of communities, they have these little micro grant programs where there's just really small amounts of money that's doled out either by the local government or by the school system or whatever for various kinds of little projects that communities do. This is an example from I think it's from Seattle, which has one of the most famous ones that people are kind of painting a big thing in their street corner. And this is something that kind of leverages people's, sweat equity, not just kind of their brains. And I think, having a range, again, a kind of range of things people can do, not just kind of thinking and talking about things, but kind of doing stuff is important to kind of sustaining their engagement. This is a highway overpass in a particular neighborhood in Seattle, and people got a micro grant in this neighborhood it was kind of a forbidding place. They created a troll. So it's huge too. It's really cool. But public art and things like that, really, you kind of tap into people's creative things, and you're making things that people can kind of be proud of, and part of what makes their neighborhood a home for them. And again, here's another piece, having some kind of a really well-structured, acknowledged kind of council or some kind of system for young people in Akron where they really are given kind of the legitimacy of kind of a title and a role, and you are part of the community's efforts to make policy around school issues, around city issues or whatever. But that it's not simply about kind of picking a bunch of high school students to kind of represent all the other high school students. That part of what you're doing there is kind of saying to them, you're not just representatives, we want you to be leaders and engagement leaders, and that part of your job is to bring other young people to the table, and you know how to do that because they're your peers, and so kind of having that be part of the expectation and part of the structure for things is really important. And then the best example of that in the U.S. right now, I think, is Hampton, Virginia, which has been going on for about 10 years, really extensive system where kids have all kinds of roles to play at the school, club, and the city level. So this is kind of the question to send you out into the night with. I mean, you kind of heard from me a few ideas of what I think you might want to do, but obviously the real question is what you think you might want to be doing to kind of help these community learning centers kind of reach their full potential. What are some strategies and civic assets? What do you have going for you already here in Akron that you might bring into this? I've heard a lot about different things that are happening here already. And what are some things you might want to copy from other communities that could be part of this picture? But basically, kind of the question is, what kinds of ingredients are appealing to you, and how are you going to put those together into some kind of recipe for your CLCs as a whole and for each individual center that's really going to help it kind of reach the kind of the full potential that it has. So, go ahead.
I think these learning centers need to have a great variety of activities. I lived in a place for 15 years where they did have a variety, and including Western square dancing. And you do have to be cooperative and trusting in that. But it's not all talking, it's activities.
That's right.
In your learning center too. I want to say one other thing about, you say certain people, especially older people that might have money, have too much say. We need to think of money as portable power, not free speech.
Right.
And so we have to learn to cut those people off, and to some extent, because they're used to ruling.
Right. Yeah. Any other? That's a powerful statement.
Let's thank Matt. I want to thank Matt for being here, for sharing with us your expertise, your experience, and your passion for civic engagement and democracy. We also want to thank all of you for coming. It's not easy to be here on a weeknight like this, but thank you so much. Remember, hopefully you've gotten some insight and some ways to think about how we can build relationships of trust in our community and how we can reach some kind common ground so that we can work for the collective good of our schools and our communities.